come from a dysfunctional family. My father was an alcoholic, and there was a lot of chaos. So when I got saved at 10, I was waiting to talk to my Sunday school teacher after class because I had been introduced to the idea of it. And so when everyone left, I told her that I wanted to ask Christ into my heart, and I didn't really fully know how to do that. But I had heard that if Jesus lives in your heart, you're never alone. And I spent a lot of frightened, lonely moments as a child, so that was very appealing to me. And when I repeated a prayer with her, I started to cry, and I felt like a load of bricks just lifted off of my shoulders. I guess I met you when I was 14.
Probably. We worked together at a place on the boardwalk in Rehoboth.
He was not a Christian.
No, I wasn't.
It was a very sore subject, and I always tried to witness to him.
Everybody that worked there, it was a miniature golf course and a motel and a gift shop. And it was a bunch of young kids, and we would hang out together, when we were done working. And after a while, I think the second year that you were working there, I started to notice her.
That's very funny.
And so we started dating, and we dated for a couple of years.
There was a moment when I was dating John, the Lord had told me that this was the man I was going to marry. And I know that sounds really weird as a very young teenager.
This is before she even asked me to marry her.
This gets cut out of the tape. And so I knew that he was the man I was supposed to marry, but I didn't want to marry anybody that wasn't a Christian. I spent from the time I was 10 years old until I was 14 or whatever, praying every day, God, you pick my husband. I don't want to marry anyone like my dad. I want a Christian husband. I was driving home from his house one night, and we had watched a movie with him and his mother, and I was on my way home. He was going back to college, to UD, and the Lord spoke to me in the car. It was so loud in my head. And the Lord spoke to me and said, you're in my way now, you have to let go. And I knew what he meant, and I pulled the car over, and I cried, and I cried, and I banged the steering wheel. I'm like, God, no, I love him now. I can't do this. But I did it. I was obedient, and I went home, and I called him at college and told him the Lord told me I had to let go of you, that I was in his way. And I knew what it meant. The Lord was ready to deal with John.
When she called and broke up with me, and then I came down to her house right away and talked to her, and she told me what was going on with her and stuff. And I realized I had like two different problems. One was my relationship with her. The other one was my relationship with God, which I had never even entertained. I was interested, but there were a lot of things about the churches that I had been to that turned me off. And so I had a problem with rationalizing how this could all work. Until he brought me to a point where I realized that rationalizing how it works isn't gonna do me any good because it's not rational. I began to seek harder about fixing my relationship with God than about fixing my relationship with her, although I was trying to do both at the same time. And so within a few days I got saved. And the question of her and her circle of friends was I doing it just to get her back, And it really didn't feel like that to me, because it felt at the moment, and she asked me the next day, how do you feel? And I said, I feel like I'm in the same place, but I'm facing 180 degrees in a different direction. And so we went through, I guess, probably a few weeks like that, where I would go over to her house and she would be someplace else, and I would just ask her mom like questions about the Bible. What does this mean? And we just
He lost
I
all
was just
interest in college.
seeking, I've got to figure out what this all means,
You read the Bible through, what, a month?
It was
Just trying
quickly,
to
yeah.
figure it all out.
So at this point, we were both working together at Grotto's, and it had been probably a few weeks, and I told her that I'd come to the point where I realized that as long as I had God, I was okay if I didn't have her. And after that realization, then God brought us back together.
We were married
We were
6
married.
months later to that, from that point, really. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I had to get to that point where, like, I could confess that he's the one that I really need. And then he blessed me with her.
After John got saved and we were married, and we're about a year maybe.
No.
Not even that long, was it? It was like months.
Yeah.
And he wanted to go to Bible college. And so we packed up our little Dodge Colt and loaded the roof and headed to
everything we owned.
Lakeland, Florida.
And it didn't pan out the way I had hoped it would. So about a month later, we loaded everything back on the Dodge Colt, everything we had, and came home. But we came home not knowing if we had a job, because when we left it was August, and when we got back it's late September. The only thing I knew was we had been paying my mom and dad $175 a month, and we had $200 to our name. So I thought, well, at least I have a month's rent. That's all I know. I have a month's rent. And when we got back, that first weekend we were back, we went to a crusade in Baltimore, I think it was. And while we were there, I felt like God was saying to put $100 in the offering. And I'm like,
John's like this.
I can't do that. That's our rent money.
He's like, Diana, I think God just told me to put $100 in the offering. And I said, then you better do it. He said, it's our rent money.
I had an argument going on with him for a while, We did it. So I go back in to see Dom, who owns Grotto's, and ask him if we could have our jobs back. And he said, yes, of course you can. And then he said, and by the way, I just bought a house on Wilmington Avenue, and it has
Ocean Block.
Yeah, in the Ocean Block, so which would mean we can walk to work in like a minute. I'll rent you an apartment in there for $100 a month.
Isn't that awesome? And so we moved in, and it was perfect. No stress of getting to work, and it's very convenient.
So it was one of those foundational things where we learned the importance of obedience, and also the understanding that our stuff is not really our own, even though we think it is.
That's right.
He allows us to be stewards of it, but our cars, our houses, our things, our money is not really our own. And if we're willing to hold it with open hands and to give it back to him, it's just amazing what he is desiring to do on our behalf because of that. When we got saved, we were at Midway Assembly of God, and God specifically called us out of there into another church.
So I was training people within that church to do a street ministry that I called Sidewalk Sunday School. And the name was Gospel Quest, and we established numerous sidewalk sites within the perimeter of that church. And one Sunday, that pastor had left. There was a new pastor there now, whom we loved very much, Pastor Kim Teffelbach. And it was after doing children's church that Sunday, I just knew I had been released. There was just something like, you're done here. It's time to go.
But what was strange about it was, unlike the first time where we were called out of into, this time we were just called out of, and we didn't know where we were supposed to go. And and this is not who we are. We don't feel the liberty to leave a church unless he gives it to us.
We see a church as a marriage.
It's a covenant.
Right.
And so it was a very, very strange period of time for us. And we started coming here just because it felt like it was a safe place to
hide
land, to hide for
because I was
her.
burnt out.
I came from the business world. I'm the executive pastor, and Pastor Bob came and asked if I would think about doing it, and I thought, I don't know if we can. We put out we laid some conditions before God, and said, God,
Really
if you
hard
can,
ones, we thought.
things that like, if these things happen, it has to be God. There were 3 of them, 3 specific things, and all 3 of them came to pass.
Within a short period of time.
We said, yes, we'll do it.
But it was also the year when the stock market crashed. So it was
Which
like
part of why it wasn't
that
as easy
all happened.
as we anticipated.
So things that
I
we
came
thought
here
we
in
had,
September
we had
of 2008, and September of 2008 is when everything flopped. We're really glad that we have that to look back at, that like, hey, there were 3 things that were not easy not easy for him to pull off. Of course they were not easy in the natural that you would think these things happen, and they all happened. So even in those moments where it's hard and you think like, God, was this really you? We can look back and say like, hey, those things happened. And
it's kind of like
gives you,
when you doubt anything in your life, you always go back to that moment of salvation. This was real.
there's
And we
something
also
solid you can go back
have
to
that
and say,
cornerstone with the transition to here, just like it was when I was waitressing. Right, John?
yeah.
So we're full circle, right?